My name is Elellanar Brooks. I am 67 years old, a widow. And for the past 7 years I have lived under the same roof as my son Michael, his wife Vanessa, and my 2 grandchildren, Noah and Lily. People assume that means I am cherished, that I am surrounded by love and warmth. The truth is more complicated. Tonight, at a dinner table, meant to look like a celebration, I was told to move as if I were nothing more than an unwanted guest in my own home. Vanessa did not raise her voice. She didn't have to. She looked at me with that polished smile of hers, the one that fools outsiders, and said calmly, "Why don't you sit somewhere else, around the table?" Laughter faded into silence. My son shifted in his chair, his eyes fixed on his plate, unable or unwilling to speak up for me. Noah and Lily glanced at me in confusion, their little hands tugging at my sleeve, hoping I would sit beside them. For a moment, the weight of humiliation pressed against my chest, but I did not argue. I smiled, stood, and pulled out the chair directly next to Mr. Harris, the family lawyer who had been invited to this gathering. The air in the room shifted. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, her carefully staged evening slipping ever so slightly out of her grasp. I folded my hands neatly on the table, my expression calm, though inside my resolve was sharp as steel. What they did not know, what no one in that room suspected, was that I had been waiting for this night. I had prepared for every word, every paper, and every accusation. Tonight, they thought they would silence me. Tonight, I would speak louder than ever. The meal carried on as if nothing had happened. Plates were passed, glasses refilled, and small talk circled the table like a performance rehearsed too many times. Vanessa laughed at her own stories, leaning forward with that bright hostess smile. But her eyes kept flicking toward the leather folder resting beside Mr. Harris. Every glance betrayed her true intention. She had not planned this dinner for family warmth. She had staged it for something far more calculated. When the plates were finally cleared, Vanessa's voice cut through the hum of conversation. She straightened in her chair, her tone polished yet firm, and said it was time to get to the real reason we had gathered. Her manicured hand tapped lightly against the polished wood. She asked Mr. Harris if he had the documents ready. The room stilled. Even the children quieted, sensing a shift in the air. Michael sat rigid, his shoulders tense, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. He didn't speak. He didn't even look at me. That silence told me more than any words could. He had agreed to this, or at least chosen not to resist. Vanessa's smile widened as she explained. According to her, it would be simpler, cleaner, and more practical if all assets were consolidated under one name, hers and Michael's. She called it clarity. She said at my age, it was easier to step back and let the younger generation manage what she described as complicated matters. Her words landed like knives, carefully sharpened, to sound reasonable, but meant to erase me completely. I felt Noah's hand slip into mine under the table, his small fingers gripping tightly. He whispered, asking what she meant. I squeezed his hand gently and told him not to worry. Inside, I stayed silent, letting her speak, letting her reveal every selfish layer. Outwardly, I kept my face calm, but my thoughts were locked on the folder beside Mr. Harris. Vanessa believed she had already won, that tonight would be her victory. What she could not see was how close she was to her unraveling. Vanessa's voice carried through the dining room with practiced confidence, but I no longer heard her words. My mind drifted back to the moment everything had shifted weeks earlier. It was an ordinary afternoon. Laundry piled in my arms. When I stopped outside the kitchen door and caught her voice on the phone, she spoke quickly, her tone low but sharp. and the walls carried every word. She said once everything was transferred into their names, I would have nothing left to claim. The house. The savings. Even the small accounts meant for Noah and Lily, she planned to seize it all. Michael would understand. She promised. Because it was easier that way. I remember standing frozen in the hallway, the towels slipping from my hands, my chest heavy with the realization that this was never about practicality. It was about erasing me. That night, I sat in my room staring at my late husband's photograph, whispering a vow that his legacy would not be twisted into Vanessa's prize. The very next morning, I scheduled a private meeting with Mr. Harris. He had been our family's attorney for decades, a man my husband trusted deeply. In his office, lined with books and quiet authority, I laid out what I had overheard. My voice trembled at first, but steadied as I spoke. Mr. Harris listened carefully, his expression grave, and reminded me that my husband had left explicit instructions. My name was protected on the deed. A trust fund could be secured for Noah and Lily, safeguarded beyond interference. Nothing Vanessa plotted could touch those provisions, unless I surrendered willingly. Together, we reviewed every document, reaffirming my rights and sealing new protections. For the first time since my husband's death, I felt the ground solid beneath my feet again. By the time I walked out of that office, I was no longer the silent widow living in someone else's house. I was the guardian of his legacy. Ready for the moment they thought I would falter. Tonight, that moment had arrived, and I was more prepared than they could imagine. Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses and placed the folder on the table with deliberate care. The sound of the clasp opening seemed louder than the laughter that had filled the room earlier. Every pair of eyes turned toward him. Some with curiosity, some with anticipation, and one with thinly veiled triumph. Vanessa leaned back slightly, her hands folded in her lap, already savoring what she believed was about to be her victory. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the tension. He reminded everyone that my late husband, Jonathan Brooks, had left detailed instructions to ensure his family was cared for. These were not new arrangements or sudden decisions. They were simply the confirmation of Jonathan's original wishes, preserved and protected. The first document slid across the table. It stated clearly that ownership of the family home remained in my name. Jonathan and I had purchased it together, and his passing did not alter my rights. I was the sole owner. There was no ambiguity. No condition. No loophole. For a brief moment, silence fell. Vanessa's face drained of color, her lips parting as if the words had struck her physically. She snapped back quickly, her voice sharp, insisting that this could not be correct. But Mr. Harris's reply was steady. The law was clear. My husband's wishes were clear. This house belonged to me. End of discussion. He sat still, my hands folded neatly, my expression calm. My voice, when I spoke, was low but unmistakable. I told her she had asked me to sit somewhere else, but I had chosen this seat so that my voice could be heard. Across the table, her eyes flared with anger. But for once, she had no clever retort. Mr. Harris continued, pulling another document from the folder. Jonathan had established a trust fund, safeguarded under my guardianship, reserved solely for Noah and Lily's education and future. No one else held authority over it. At those words, my grandchildren straightened in their seats, their young faces bright with confusion but also hope. I leaned closer to them, whispering that it meant their future was safe. Vanessa slammed her palm against the table, her composure cracking. She argued that I was too old, that I could not manage such responsibility. But Mr. Harris did not flinch. With respect, he said, Experience was not weakness, it was strength. The weight of his words filled the room. And for the first time that evening, Vanessa had nothing left to hide behind. The room had already tilted out of Vanessa's control. But Mr. Harris was not finished. He lifted another folder. Slimmer, yet somehow heavier with consequence. His tone sharpened as he explained there was additional information Jonathan had wanted, secured for protection. Vanessa's posture stiffened, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair. She had expected a victory. But what came next unraveled her carefully woven mask. Mr. Harris revealed that during his recent review of financial records, he uncovered irregular transactions tied to Vanessa. Funds had been withdrawn from joint family accounts, then funneled toward an outside business partner. At first glance, the amount seemed disguised as event expenses. In truth, they were supporting a private arrangement. The evidence, he explained, pointed to both financial misconduct and a personal relationship that crossed every line of trust. Michael's head jerked up at the words. The color drained from his face. And for the first time all evening, his silence cracked. His voice, low and unsteady, asked what Mr. Harris meant. The answer was clear. Vanessa had not only attempted to seize control of the family's assets, she had also betrayed her husband through an affair with one of her industry partners. The dining room erupted with tensions so thick it seemed to press against the walls. Vanessa tried to recover, insisting the documents were misinterpreted, that the payments were professional, that Mr. Harris was twisting facts, but the details were too precise. The paper trail too clean. Every transfer, every expense, every signature told its own story. Michael leaned back heavily, his hands covering his face. The weight of realization settled on him, and the very foundation of his marriage cracked in front of us all. Noah and Lily watched in confusion, sensing the chaos without understanding the betrayal. Vanessa's voice grew desperate, louder, filled with anger instead of control. She called the accusations lies, an ambush staged against her. Yet each denial only confirmed what everyone in that room already knew. She had underestimated me. Underestimated the quiet hours I had spent gathering strength, and underestimated the loyalty of a lawyer who valued truth over appearances. The silence that followed was unbearable, broken only by Michael's ragged breathing. The woman who believed she had orchestrated the evening now found herself exposed, her power slipping through her fingers like water. Vanessa's voice still rang with denials, but the more she shouted, the weaker her position became. The documents on the table were not whispers or suspicions. They were facts, and I had come prepared with more than just quiet patience. I leaned forward, my hands still folded neatly, and spoke with a steadiness that silenced her mid-sentence. I told her that every irregular payment she had made had already been traced and documented, not just by Mr. Harris, but by me. For months I had been watching the accounts, keeping copies of every transfer, every unexplained expense. I had given Mr. Harris the records, and he had confirmed their accuracy. Her face tightened, the flush rising to her cheeks. She demanded to know how I dared to look through the accounts. I reminded her that the accounts were never hers to begin with, that every dollar belonged to the family my husband and I had built. If she wanted to treat it as her personal fund, then she would face the consequences. Mr. Harris added that the documents had already been prepared for submission. If Vanessa attempted to contest ownership, those records would be presented before the court and before her professional board. Every client, every partner in her event planning career would see exactly how she had blurred the line between business and betrayal. Her reputation, so carefully polished, would shatter. Michael finally raised his head, his voice hollow but certain. He admitted he had seen the tension, the small signs, but had chosen to ignore them. Now, faced with undeniable proof, he could no longer defend her. The betrayal was no longer a private wound. It was written into the very numbers she thought no one would notice. The room felt smaller, the air heavy with her unraveling. Vanessa's bravado collapsed under the weight of exposure. She had tried to strip me of dignity. Irase my claim. And Zeit's control. Instead, her career now dangled on the edge of ruin. Her financial manipulations laid bare. The woman who built her life on appearances was about to lose the one thing she valued most, the admiration of others. I sat back. Not triumphant, but resolute. Revenge had never needed shouting. All it required was truth, revealed at the right moment, with no escape left behind. The walls of the dining room seemed to close in as silence stretched between us. Vanessa's fury finally broke free. She shoved back her chair, the legs scraping harshly against the floor, and declared that this was not the end. Her voice was sharp. Desperate. Clinging to the illusion of control, but the power in her words was gone. Everyone at the table had seen the evidence. Everyone knew she had lost. I turned my eyes to her and spoke with the same calm tone I had carried all evening. I told her it was over. Not tomorrow. Not someday. But tonight, there would be no more arguments. No more schemes whispered behind closed doors. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no turning it back. Michael's face was pale, his hands trembling as he looked between us. At last, he lowered his head and admitted what none of us could deny. He had failed to protect me, failed to see what Vanessa had become, and now he could not protect her either. His words were broken, filled with regret, but they came too late to mend anything. Noah and Lily moved closer to me, their small arms wrapping around mine. They didn't understand the full weight of the betrayal, but they knew where safety rested. Their trust, their innocence, was the one thing untouched by the wreckage spreading through the room. Vanessa's final glare burned across the table, but even that could not mask the fracture she had caused. The family she had tried to control now sat in ruins, her own voice swallowed by the silence she had created. For the first time in years, I felt the balance tilt back to where it belonged. The evening ended not with shouting, but with silence so sharp it seemed to echo. Vanessa's plans had collapsed under their own weight. Her reputation was in jeopardy, her career threatened, her grip on the family gone. Michael sat slumped in his chair, the cost of his silence finally written across his face. He would carry the shame of allowing this to unfold. But that burden was his to bear. Mr. Harris gathered the documents with practiced calm, confirming once more that Jonathan's wishes were secure. The house remained mine, the trust fund locked for Noah and Lily, and every attempt to strip me of dignity had failed. My grandchildren leaned against me, their trust steady, their future safe. I had been treated as though I could be erased, as though my years meant weakness. But tonight proved otherwise. Vanessa had wanted power, money, and control. Yet in the end, she stood with nothing. The family she thought she could bend to her will was gone, fractured by her own ambition. As I looked across the table, I felt no need for gloating. Justice did not require noise. It required patience, proof, and the courage to face betrayal head-on. And tonight, justice had spoken. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If you've ever faced betrayal or witnessed power games inside a family, share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful revenge stories yet to come.